I am Courtney Kearney, owner and founder of CKearney Consulting, and we host and facilitate monthly calls. We have a marketing call and a CRM call. This month, the marketing call fell on January 1st. We knew that not many people were going to be working, if any. So we combined the marketing call and the user group call this month on this call. So thank you so much for joining us. I have invited Marion to speak with us on behalf of the SPM Foundation. Since we were combining both calls, I thought that the foundation's research and paper that they produced on MarTech would be perfect because it combines marketing and technology, and the technology that we use in marketing to do our jobs. So I will let everybody introduce themselves, and then I'll turn it over to Marion to introduce herself, and then we'll jump in. So Jen and Ellen, I know that you're there since we were just chatting, so I will let you introduce yourself first.
Sorry, I had to unmute. My name is Jennifer Batchelder, and I'm with Micron General Contractors.
My name is Ellen Peniston, and I'm also with Micron General Contractors.
Thank you for joining us, ladies. All right, I'm going to start at the top of the participants list, and Amy Amaya.
Hello, it's Amy. I'm the operations manager for CKearney Consulting.
Fantastic. We've got Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan Young from FA Home Construction.
Welcome. Another Jen, it looks like Jen Allen.
Hey, I'm Jen Allen from CKearney Construction, and I'm the marketing database manager.
Fantastic. And we have Joe.
Hello, this is Joe Rostek. I'm from Williams Architects.
Welcome. Jill.
Hi, I'm Jill Aronson. I'm a marketing coordinator at HR Green.
Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Johnson. I'm a marketing coordinator at KPFF.
Stacy.
Hi, I'm Stacy. I'm a marketing data analyst with WSP.
Welcome. I'm going to scroll down. Natalie.
Natalie Price and Amber Emily is with me, and we're from Krause Anderson Construction Company, and we're in the Marketing Information Systems group.
Fantastic. And it looks like we have somebody logged in as iPhone. I don't know if you have audio to share or introduce yourself, but feel free to do that if that is you.
That might be me. This is Brittany Leopold with Carpenter Meddy.
Welcome.
I'm home with a sick kid, so.
Well, thank you for taking the time to call in. That's fantastic. Sorry to hear about the sick kiddo.
Oh no, she's sleeping, taking a nap.
Yes. The 303 area code.
This is Wade Corliss from Alcorn Construction.
Welcome. And then 614 area code. And a 612 area code. All right. Is there anybody that I missed that did not get to introduce themselves? All right. I will kick it off and introduce Marion. Thank you so much for being our guest speaker today. And Mary and I met at the Swarm Retreat last October, and she is a fellow consultant to our industry. If you are in need of a coach on the personal or professional side, she is fantastic. And she also is a CMO to go. So if your department is in need or transitioning for a chief marketing officer, she's a fantastic resource. She also helps with recruiting. So if you are in need of having your department evaluated to see what positions would be good for your size firm, and then helping people fill those is her passion. So I will turn it over to her and let her maybe dive deeper on any of those topics or services that you provide. Marion, I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you, Courtney, and welcome to everybody on the phone, and Happy New Year. It's always interesting to conduct these type of webinars where nobody gets to see each other. And so anytime during the conversation, because I don't believe I have the tools to see if anyone has their hands up, feel free to interrupt me, ask a question. My goal is that you learn a little something today, or at least come with some aha moment or confirmation that what you're doing is on the right track, and leave it at that. The reason I'm giving this is because I am a member, a trustee on the SPM Foundation. I worked on this project. Our author for this, actually, I'll open it by, saying the name, and that is Powering Up Technology, a spotlight on MarTech 2019. If you can flip to the next page, Courtney, and that tells us that this was a research project, which SPM Foundation is about conducting research for the AEC industry on basically how to make the world better for marketers and their firms. And we've moved to conducting foundation research that with other firms, so that it's sometimes we do primary, sometimes we do secondary. This particular project was in we sought out the help of Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and worked with one of their associate professors, Dr. Ramana Madpuli. I'm definitely butchering her name. She is a director in the Masters of Marketing Research program. So we've been trying to identify firms that are recognizing professional services and not just product marketing. That's one of the goals of the foundation as well, is to reach out and branch to that. And so the research student that worked with us on this project and conducted the surveying, her name was Elaine Beardsley. And then Amy Collins, who is from one of our trustees on the foundation. She also is the facilities business line marketing manager for Gannett Fleming. She is the primary author. There were several of us on the trustees board that also helped in editing and making this report what we felt would be of value to all of you out there. Can you switch to the next slide? So always, because when we're talking about marketing, and I think in our firms even the term marketing and business development is not always used the same, we like to preface it by really defining what marketing is and how we're speaking to it in the information that we're sharing. And in this case, it's the process of creating firm awareness, building and differentiating your brand, driving business development activities, and identifying, anticipating, and satisfying client objectives to achieve profitable business goals. So basically everything in here is referring to marketing activities, which includes business development and the activities related to business development. For the sake of this article, we also decided it was important to identify what we meant by MarTech so everyone understood. And we're using it as a term to refer to a vast array of marketing technology tools that help marketers plan, execute, and measure their marketing campaigns. These tools are used to automate or otherwise streamline the processes, collect and analyze data, and provide the various means of teaching and engaging with target audiences. And just off the bat, the types of examples are client relationship management, CRMs, contact management systems, CMSs, digital asset management, DAMs, web analytics, and email marketing platforms. So that's kind of the arena that we're talking about today. Before I jump in, does anyone have any quick questions? I'll take the crickets as a no and move on to basically, if you can change the next slide, what our survey objectives were in conducting this. We wanted to investigate how companies in the AEC arena are using MarTech tools. We also wanted to document how this technology shift might be changing in regards to the role of the marketer, what we know as a traditional marketing department, and then how are people investing in these technologies from a financial standpoint as well as personal resources. Are they dedicating staff, things like that. If you could move to the next slide. We had 4 primary research questions and objectives. What MarTech platforms are commonly being used in the industry? How is your firm using MarTech? And so that was specific to the respondents. How does the MarTech skill set differ from that of traditional marketing role? And finally, how is MarTech changing marketing departments within the AEC industries? So as you can see, there's subsets. Courtney, I'm assuming that you can make this PDF available to anyone, or anyone who's an SMPS member can actually go online and download the whole report for free.
Yes. When we send out the follow-up email, we will have a link to the blog article that's recapping this call along with the option to download.
And so all the different platforms that were discussed in the survey ranged from CMS, advertising tools, conversion tools, email marketing platforms, social platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, CRM, web analytics, artificial intelligence, marketing automation, customer service, predictive intelligence, and account-based marketing tools. So those were all the questionnaires that went out, and there were surveys that were conducted, were all focused around each of these topics. You could switch to the next slide. So the survey, basically, before we administered the electronic survey out to the selected group of people, the student researcher conducted some secondary research about the MarTech tools by interviewing 6 different SMPS members about the topic to inform the survey questions. And the purpose of that was so that we could get the young researcher better understanding our AEC arena. When we're looking at where our responses came from the general survey that is out, 32%, you can see we're engineering, and 16% architecture, and then an AE combo of 15%, which that in itself is like 70% almost. And then you're at general construction and construction management and specialty consulting all the way down. So the bulk of this is all AE with some construction. Can you change the next slide? So basically what I'm going to walk you through now is the findings. The number one finding, and I don't think this was a surprise to anyone, the top 5 tools showed up as social platforms, CRM, email marketing platforms, which would be your MailChimps and Constant Contacts, web analytics, and CMSs. These are the ones that most marketers are aware and view as most important of all the known technologies. Can you move on? Number 2, there was a host of barriers when it came to using MarTech. The respondents noted them below as either, all the lists below are either extremely or very significant. The number 1 being budgetary restrictions, which means firms aren't putting it into their budgets or seeing the value by putting it in their budgets. The lack of time to research the options. Recognizing there's so many platforms out there, not really sure where to go, and so that gets in the way. The difficulty in integrating software with their current software used. Trying to figure out if you're using Deltek, how do you mesh or make these programs work together for most effectiveness. The lack of benchmarking or understanding how to measure results. The uncertainty in the deciding options, and the difficulty in training employees, which is probably why many of you are all on this call, because you work with someone like Courtney and her team, and she helps you get past some of these barriers. If you can move on to the next slide. So number 3, what was interesting to me on this is 38% reported the MarTech tools as important or extremely important, and yet you can see they're important to overall performance, but they're not all being used. And finding number 4 steps into how are they using them, why do they see them as important, building brand awareness, acquiring and retaining customers, recruitment, and increased prospect engagement. Can you move on to the next slide? Number 5, respondents believe the current strategy of their company is average or unsuccessful. 80% gave that feedback, expressing the belief it's very clear that there's significant room for growth. So those of you who are in this arena, there's a lot of work to be had. Next slide.
Marion, this is Courtney. I was going to ask, on this one, did you guys hear that it was their company or the feeling of AEC in general being behind the times on MarTech?
Well, I think that's a little bit of a chicken the egg kind of question, because AEC generally is behind on almost all adoption. And when you look, if you remember, the majority of the respondents came from engineering firms. Engineering firms by nature are risk averse. That's just, that's the nature of an engineering firm, is to be risk averse. So it's not surprising that those results came in that way. The other side of the coin, though, is I don't think people are making a strong enough business case and being able to show the value of these systems. And that'll show up in some of these results as we go on. I think it'll be a little clearer for you.
All right, thank you.
Can you go to the next slide? So of the top 5 metrics that were reported, obviously the 2 that show up the most are web traffic and social media. Most of the and then some people are paying attention to their click-through rates, their brand awareness, and then customer retention rates. What was interesting is that most of the respondents only report annually to their firms, and 20% don't even report these metrics at all to their firms. So if I think that's a little bit of back to your question, Courtney. If people are finding that there's barriers to get into it, if you're not even reporting on the value of the tools that you do have, I'm not sure why anyone would want to give you money to invest in additional ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a question on the brand awareness. Did anybody dig into that to see how they're gathering that? Is that a third party that they're doing kind of an interview situation, or how were they gauging that?
This was just based on the questionnaire from the team, the respondents, and that they would say that. That's actually a really good question. Would you jot it down for me? Because I know the foundation is going to go out and conduct this again in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely.
It would be good to get some clarity around that.
Yeah.
So I think the more questions you have to help us look at clarity will be really valuable.
The other, and I don't know if this is going to come out later, but the other things that I would like to see is, now that they're saying that these are the top 5, like what are the averages? Like of web traffic, like what are the averages for an engineering firm? What's an average for a construction firm? Just so we can gauge ourselves, because I know the SMPS put out averages several years ago, but I would love to see it updated, but more specific, other than just the average for email is 26% or whatever it is.
Right. Because you can go out and look at what obvious, good click-through rates are when you're comparing yourself to a B2C, but what are the B2B kind of conversations?
Exactly.
and specifically AEC. So if you don't mind just jotting those questions down, I will make sure it gets back to Amy, who spearheads this project for us.
Perfect.
And the next slide. So finding number 7, the MarTech products are typically selected by the marketing department of a firm. So that's how that came out. And then reiterating, most firms evaluate which tools they use annually, but nearly 30% don't systematically evaluate at all. So that's where I've drawn the box around the firms that are doing it at least annually down to daily. So obvious, you've got people, when it says they're using them, they're paying attention to their click-through rate every day, or their web traffic every day perhaps, or people are doing it every 6 months or quarterly. Courtney, do you have a recommendation for your clients, how often you recommend that they actually conduct their evaluations?
Yeah, I think it depends on who your audience is. So I think as a marketing department, you should be looking at it at least every 2 weeks, in my opinion, but that's as a marketing department, so that you can also gauge your ROI on your efforts. If you do something monthly, like an email campaign or something like that, then obviously you would be looking at those statistics. I think for leadership, it should be quarterly. If you have something like a stakeholders meeting that's twice a year, then I think that's a perfect opportunity to at least the very, very least, get one slide in the deck to show these are the marketing analytics, whether it's, bare bones. If you don't have any systems, you can come up with something to report, just so that you're showing the marketing effort, what is the value, so that you can continue to have that audience. I think annually is the least that we can do, but I think that is too, that's not often enough to be in front of the leadership and to keep it top of mind, so that when you do want to make those innovative asks or to have asking for funding, I think you have to stay more top of mind than once a year.
I think that's, when you look at this, that just shows there's an amazing amount of growth or room to carve out a position for yourself if you enjoy analytics and data and all that stuff. And one of the things that's interesting to me is maybe a better conversation on what do we mean by evaluation, and that is how you track it and display it. I'm wondering if some people are confusing the reporting versus evaluation, because that's a very different conversation.
The other thing that I did want to add is that having it really helps on the operation side too, so that when you are asking your technical staff for content for the website or content for an email campaign, when you're showing the results of that on an annual basis of, this is what we were able to show when we had this content, our click-through rate went up 25% or whatever that looks like, because to them, then that ask is not as off-putting, because they see that their efforts are being productive and not just, hey, I wrote this thing and something may or may not have come from it.
Great point. Anybody else have any comments on this? Because I think this is probably, that we could probably almost have a whole conversation on this particular topic. I'm just curious if anyone else has any questions before I move on to the next one.
I do. This is Megan from Wilhelm. And as you're talking about evaluation, something that I'm curious how you would equate that to potential project dollars. That seems to be the most important metric in most construction firms, at least. And it's hard to justify some marketing expenses because they don't directly translate to, it's all potential revenue, right? So how do you overcome that?
Well, Courtney, I'll let you pipe in on this, but my first instinct is to say, when you're teaching your technical staff if calls come in that are unsolicited, they're not people that you've already been tracking, you should always be asking, how did you hear about us? And what's interesting is in the firms that I've worked with where they do that, the technical staff are starting to hear things like, well, I saw an article that was posted on your website, or I saw this, or I saw that, and that is reinforcing that a lot. The other thing is to start tracking when you know a project came through your website, to actually document that. But you just track it and run a series of numbers for yourself, you'll start to see the ebb and flows, and you can start to equate real projects that come in as well. Courtney, do you have any other comments for that?
Yeah, Megan, that's a great question. And I think it applies for outside of construction too. And the way that I kind of look at this is the value of content. So for our specific emails, we have a link that we watch for every content piece, if you will, in our emails, so that we can see what got the most clicks. And you can do that in turn with your projects. So if you have a healthcare project, a commercial project, both in an email campaign, then you can see who's clicking those specific projects to read more. And then that can then turn into, did we get more traction in one area over the other? And no, you cannot directly correlate those, but as Marian said, I think that you can, in a sense of the uptick could be because of this content. Just like if you get a specific project featured in ENR, and then people are calling you for that type of project, then you can correlate those, although you cannot directly say, because we have this ENR article, we won this project. But I think that you can, if you're watching those analytics, show that, hey, this could be helping, and this is why I think that.
Great, thank you.
For those that are calling in that might not have access to audio, or if you're in an office space, if you want to use the chat, I do have it open, so I am watching that. If you do want to place some of your questions in the chat box, I'm happy to ask them on your behalf as well.
Any other questions before we move? So next slide. This one is interesting, and it all is focused on how marketing, the respondents to this particular survey, 41% of them did not know how much the firm spends on MarTech tools. So it's a little hard to judge what that really breaks down into. You know, perhaps these were marketing coordinators that have a role in MarTech, so they are maybe not privy to that. But I think if this is an arena that you have an interest in, it behooves you to find out what the spend is, so that you can help make sure that there is an ROI that's coming on this. When you step then into the next layer of those who did, so, you know, the 59% that did know where the money was being spent, 42% of them stated that about, I think this was a huge range, 0 to 19% of their marketing budget is dedicated to MarTech. So for me, this tells me we're really all over the place. We have firms that are spending very little, firms that may be a lot farther along in the process, you know, all the way into automation. And then moving on, approximately 20% of departments have a specific employee, or they use an external consultant to help them achieve their goals. So that's also a pretty low number. And then that means it's kind of you know, my interpretation of that is it's an assignment to somebody on staff that also has several other things they're trying to do, so it's not as focused as possibly it could be. And then lastly, over 50% of the respondents do not anticipate hiring a consultant or an employee to fill this role. And that number actually gets even more interesting if you move on to the next slide. Where it's further on. It's how, and just hold that thought and it'll come back. For the firms that are looking at hiring someone, they're saying when it comes to the, you know, a MarTech situation, they're hiring new employees, but the focus is less on hiring employees with experience with specific tools and more on the employee having strong analytic abilities. And I think there's some good sense to that in the terms that tools come and go. So if you only know one, you know, they're not being specific about having to know a particular system, but rather being educated in several. And Courtney is a classic example of understanding several of the tools to where she can even help you identify which one might be most suitable to you. So having someone on staff that understands like that is you know, a real bonus. They also talked about new employees that they're looking at hiring, the importance of being skilled at design and communication, as well as being able to adapt to the changing MarTech environment. So
I'm curious, this is Stacy. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was curious if those were just given or were those choices? I was just curious.
These actually came out of the they were ranked.
Okay. I would love to see project management in there. I feel like that kind of a position, especially running the implementation of a CRM system, project management is huge, and I was just surprised not to see it there.
That's actually that's an incredibly strong and valuable point, and one that Courtney, if you're taking some notes, would you write that one down for me as well? Because this is the kind of stuff, as we move from this survey to the next survey and how we're watching this progress, that's just an incredibly valuable tool. And I think it's also part of what we would call the 2020 marketing professional is being able to be a project manager. Any other comments? Let's move to number 10. So the last one, and these are, you know, basically, you know, the question, what do you think is going to be popular in the future? And, you know, I think we're all very curious about artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and then what new products are specifically being created for AEC. If any of you on the call have questions and didn't already participate in the earlier survey, I highly recommend that you start thinking about what you want and get that information off to someone like Courtney who can help. I'd love to see Courtney, you be part of the team that prepares the next survey, if you have an interest in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next slide. These are the conclusions that came out of it. It was, you know, I don't know how what the demographic of all of you. My demographic is I've been doing this for 40 plus years. So I've been around a really long time, to the point where I helped. I was one of the co-authors on the very first white paper for the foundation that had to do with social media. And we actually didn't even call it social media. It was called social networking. It was so new to our industry at the time. People didn't the term social media hadn't even really been fully adopted, even in the B2C. We were still talking about it as social networks. And I remember conducting the survey we conducted, and at that time, people thought of that as live networking events. It was not, they had not equated it to the internet and things like Facebook and LinkedIn, which they were just starting to come on the scene at that time. So I see, you know, at that point in time, we were telling everyone, listen, the train's left the station. This isn't a matter of should you do it. It's a matter of you better figure out how to do it if you want to stay ahead of the curve. And MarTech is really no different, especially when you're starting to get into, you're starting to look at being able to relate and personalize information to your clients and customers. There are firms that are doing it and are becoming very agile, and they will be way, way, way out of front of the firms who do not invest in this. So definitely you need to figure out how to put your big toe in the water if you haven't already. The other part that's super huge here is the respondents are craving training resources, both in terms of education of the countless categories of all the different stuff that's out there, and on, you know, once you've purchased something, just how do you make it work? How do you take this investment and make it worthy of the time and energy that you are using it? And I think a firm like Courtney's is a classic example of a resource to lean into and hear and ask more questions of. The respondents were not reporting on success of firms. Oh, this is where I wanted to relate back to, if you go back to the findings on 20% of the departments, 50% of the respondents do not anticipate hiring a consultant or an employee or using anyone outside. This is where I wanted to relate that to it. We're now also seeing respondents are not reporting on the success of the firm. 29% stated they do not report on the metrics at all, and 34% their findings only on an annual basis. That tells me why they're not looking to hire, because they don't even understand the value of what they have in their own hands. So these people have dipped their toe, but they're, my guess, and this is where my questions are for the next survey, is have you spread yourself so thin that you just play in all these fields and you're not successful at anything, rather than being intentional and disciplined and accountable with the systems that you do have. And the last concluding comment, AEC firms are beginning to harness these systems, platforms, and executing and analyzing modern campaigns. And that I know for a fact. It's telling for our firms that are being very successful at it. The next slide, which is just basically a little bit about SMPS and the foundation, and, you know, just our closing statements. So with that, I'll just open it up to final questions.
Again, if you are in an office where audio is difficult or don't have the option, feel free to drop a question in the chat and I can ask on your behalf.
I don't have a question as much as a statement. This is Stacy again. I've been around too long too. And I remember a time when MarCom wasn't a very common full-time position within an AEC firm, and now is. And I think MarTech will be too. I mean, I really see that change. Being able to carve out a niche for myself as a full-time MarTech. I think that I get more calls now today about people who want to perform that role or firms who want to hire for that role than I ever did. So I definitely am interested in those surveys next, because I think it is changing.
It's Stacy is your last name?
It's Ho.
Oh, I figured it was you. I just wanted to be sure. Stacy, I think I would really like, were you part of,
I was not. Amy's great. I mean, I'm sure she did a fabulous job, but I was not a part of the first one, no.
Yeah, and so this is what I'm, you know, with a little bit of my personal goal on this is to make sure we're kind of broadening it out even within SMPS as to who we're reaching out to. So whereas, because I do know that's an arena that you like to play in and you're very good at. So awesome.
Yeah, I've actually
I will make sure your name is
I've been encouraging them to include it as a role in the new blueprints as well. I really feel like it's coming, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm working with a firm right now that is struggling with why they should build a digital asset management system, and it's a bit of a dilemma. And you know, all they can see is what could go wrong with it and how it's going to be so hard to implement. And I keep trying to explain to them, you have no idea how much time you're wasting. Everyone looking for things all the time, and various versions out there and all this different stuff. There's a point, and it's not unlike the CRMs and the CMSs, is like sometimes you just got to step in, you got to stop worrying about the past and just keep on moving forward. So, any other comments, questions?
I have one more. This is Megan. the issue that sometimes I've come up with when proposing these types of technologies is kind of the gap between marketing and their uses of that and then translating it to an IT proposition. If IT has to be the one who kind of okays a software or a third party, any kind of security risks that go along with that, it feels like there's an overload of information and no real connection to systems across the board. So like operations uses something to track an employee, HR uses something else, and marketing uses a third system. How have people that maybe you've come into contact with bridged that information disparity?
Courtney, do you want to answer that?
Yes, I was itching. I was going to wait to see what you had to say.
I could go on, but I actually think you probably deal with this far more than I do. So go for it.
I think that it has to do with your culture, of course, in your firm as to who's going to drive the efforts of coming together. And the very first step is saying, okay, we need to map this out and what is our process behind it. And that is, as a consultant, the very first step that we do when we start to take on clients is, okay, what is your process? And people want to jump right into the system. And we're like, well, then it's going to fall apart. The system will not be used efficiently if we don't understand how you intend to use it, if you yourself don't understand how you're going to use it. So really taking a step back and taking on, if your culture allows the marketing department to take that on and say, okay, let's bring all the pieces together, someone for operations, someone from IT, someone from marketing. If you have a separate communications department or a PR department, I know some of our clients split that apart so that external and internal communications are two different departments, but bringing at least one person from every department or representation of those efforts to come together to say, okay, who is doing what systems do we have? Also bringing in that HR, I think, is really important. If you do have any sort of Procore operations, that kind of stuff, bring them in as well, so that you can at least sit down on the table and start whiteboarding and sketching out. Let's just start with a list. Like, what systems do we have? And does everybody know what everybody else is using? When I was at the last general contractor that I worked at in a marketing department, we sat down with IT and said, okay, what are we doing? Like, I feel like I'm undoing what you're doing, and I feel like you're undoing what I'm doing, and this is getting really frustrating. So we kind of knew that there were some forward thinkers in the IT department and got them to come to sit to the table. And then we eventually invited HR once we kind of had our stuff together. And then we invited operations. So we kind of built on it. We didn't invite everybody at the beginning because IT and marketing were so disjointed that it would have been unproductive to add even more people to the discussion. So for us, we got our stuff together, put it together in a very basic sketch, nothing fancy, where we could visually see, okay, when a new hire comes in, IT creates their account, which then goes to HR, which then goes to marketing. And we didn't spend very much time on that sketch, but that everybody could at least visualize it. And then HR came in and said, oh, did you know that we also do this at termination? Or did you know that we do this for reviews? Did you know that we have this other system that's hiding over here that does photos of everybody? So that could begin to come to light. It was incredible what came out of that in the sense of money saved because of the things that we were able to get rid of or streamline or reduce, so that and nothing again happened overnight, as everybody on the call knows, that those are things that happen over time. That can be the reason behind you wanting to come, is not only efficiency, but also to help the company save on the bottom line and on overhead, so that you can say, without a doubt, we are efficient, we are using and maximizing all the systems that we have purchased. if you are looking to purchase a new system, I think starting there is also a great way, so that when somebody asks you, hey, we need a CRM, can you evaluate? Part of that evaluation process can be those discussions, going to HR and saying, hey, I've been asked to evaluate the system. I would like to know and create a list of what you're using, and I want to know if it can integrate with whatever systems I'm evaluating. So those are definitely steps that we take as a consultant. We also walk other people through, and that I've personally lived through in a firm to kind of help that discussion and that process.
So Courtney, something that comes to mind, and many of you know this term, but something to think about, and it's like you can do this on your own, is do a SWOT. Do a SWOT on the systems that you have. What are the strengths of what you've got, the weaknesses, and the opportunities and the threats. If you do these SWOTs, a tool that I've been using in strategic planning, but I also use SWOTs for other reasons. I do them with Post-its, and the funny thing is, if you get a bunch of people independently putting all these Post-its up there, and then you start to look at all the Post-its in any category, say all your strengths or all your weaknesses, and you start to group those Post-its, what's really clear is all the priorities start to bubble up. And then you see these groupings, and maybe it comes out to be 4 or 5 different main categories that are going on. Then you can prioritize from what you need to work from there. It's an incredible tool. So looking at, pulling all the resources, as Courtney talked about, but then also doing it in a SWOT process is pretty powerful.
I completely agree too that technology is not 9/10 of the law. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's not, right? I mean, the technology is such a small part of it. It is the part that helps you be more efficient, but as everybody knows, it's very hard to implement. So I think looking at the process, exactly what she said is key, and that's something that you can do even without sometimes your IT group, although I do also wholeheartedly agree in getting everyone at the same table. But just, doing that analysis of how long does it take you? How many people do you have to go to get that information? How accurate is the information? Doing that sort of process analysis, I think is a fantastic first step if you can't get, further discussion about the technology itself right away.
Right. It's basically building a business case. Other thoughts or questions?
I kind of wanted to build on that too. If you are so underwater and feel like a proposal sweatshop, that you're like, hey, I totally get where you guys are coming from, but you're living in a dream world with rainbows and unicorns. If you are that person that's listening to this, if you have a notepad or some scrap of paper at your desk, and while you go and ask or look in X amount of server file for the 100th time, just simply write it down, like server file, and put a tally mark, and then another tally mark when you go back to the server file, and another tally mark. And after a week of that, or I had to call accounting, or I had to make a phone call, or I had to go to the operations, whatever those little interruptions are, that if you just jot them down and then put a tally mark, that alone can be very eye-opening to not only you or your manager or the department at large, so that you can, and that's, I mean, a tally mark does not take all that much time. So it can be something that quick. And I feel like sometimes as marketers, we make things bigger than they need to be. And we want to make them pretty and make them reportable and put them in an infographic. And sometimes a piece of paper and a pencil is just fine to collect that data. On the flip side of that, if you are bringing someone new into your department, they are the perfect specimen to gather this information, because they are lost and they are brand new to gathering information. So if it is not as clear as you search the project name in said database, then they then have to go figure it out. And they can be great resources for, hey, every time that you don't know where something is, write it down, so that we can then look at it once a week, every other day, however your management style is, so that you can begin to see these are our inefficiencies. Because we do not have a system or a center point of data collection, this is what we're doing to people. And it's not just marketing. It's also HR. It is also accounting. It is also IT that is struggling with these inefficiencies, we are not a silo. So I think that those two pieces are great places to start.
So, any last questions? I have something I wanted to leave you with, and this is, I attended the Pinnacle conference with SMPS last November in Denver, and one of my ahas, and I've been doing this a very long time, so when we get an aha after 40 some years, I pay attention to it. The construction firm Suffolk Construction retained a new CMO in the last year. I guess she's been on board a little bit, just over a year, and I am forgetting her name, and I should have written it down. I didn't write it down to bring with me. Anyways, she was formerly, and I can get it to anybody who wants it, she was formerly the CMO for E-Trade. So we're talking somebody who's really high on the MarTech side, moving into our world. And why did she do it? And she said she liked challenges, and E-Trade had gone down to be a commodity. So she saw this as something worthy of taking on. But the comment that she made that struck me the most was she flipped their marketing department up on its head, and she took them from being the go-to resource of being the marketing. She didn't want that to be the funnel anymore. She wanted them to do real marketing. So the systems needed to be in place so that everybody else could get what they wanted. So instead of just you deciding every time you go look for something, think about how many times are you the person everyone comes and asks for things, because marketing is a gatekeeper. Instead of making it easy and all these things are readily accessible for people, what if you flipped it on its head and people could get anything they wanted easily on their own, and they knew exactly where it was because it was super self-explanatory. Remember, we all use the internet. We know how to hunt for stuff these days. So do our staff, other than the old guard, which we all know may not happen. But start to think in those terms so that you can really turn out to be a marketing and communications professional. Or if you're the person that wants to be this MarTech, you have definitely a life, because you're going to be the one that's managing all these systems. So that's my kind of final closing comment, and something really to chew on in the next 5 years. And with that, I'll say, Courtney, thank you so much for inviting myself and the SMPS Foundation to present to you.
I greatly appreciate it. Thank you. And we will make a donation to the SMPS Foundation to show our appreciation for not only this presentation, but what you guys are doing on behalf of us as marketers, so that we can have credible content to bring to our leadership. And also it just adds to the credibility of our profession. I know that looking back at when I was introduced to this department, or to this industry and marketing at large, it was when we had a copy room with a ton of holes in the wall of trays where we pulled papers and stuck them together, and that was what a proposal was. And we had things with cutting and actually taping and then copying, and we were just seen as an extension of administrative staff. And so now, looking at where we've come 20 years later, it's incredible, and I owe a lot of that to the SMPS organization and now the foundation, because you elevate what we do and put us in the likes of what B2C is doing. So I do appreciate your time and the foundation's time as well.
Oh, thank you very much. Very generous of you.
I appreciate it. So thank you everyone for calling in and for participating. We will have a blog recap of this on the website. Feel free to send it to other colleagues. We will have a recording of this and also a downloadable for the presentation. And we will start back on our regular schedule for next month, where we have the first Wednesday of the month is the marketing call, and the second Thursday of the month is our CRM call. So I look forward to seeing you all then, and I hope you have a good rest of your week. Thank you.
Bye, Courtney.
Bye. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.